Okay, so imagine this, right? You're sitting there and you want to send an email,
Mm.
but instead of typing it out, you just think the words and it appears on the screen.
Whoa.
Or maybe even more mind-blowing, you're navigating a virtual world just by using your attention, like where you're focusing.
Yeah, that
It
sounds...
sounds like straight out of a sci-fi movie, right?
It really does.
But this isn't science fiction. This is the reality we're rapidly heading towards with brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs as they're called. And honestly, trying to keep up with all the research and the advancements in this field, it can be pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that too. There's so much happening so quickly.
That's exactly why we decided to tackle this topic today. So welcome to Dansplain.
And today on Dansplain, we're taking a deep dive into BCIs. You know, our wonderful listener sent us a ton of really interesting stuff on this. Everything from like historical overviews of how this all began to the latest developments from some pretty cutting-edge companies.
Yeah, they did. It's a really fascinating collection of materials.
It is, and they were really curious to get a handle on where this technology is going, like what's on the horizon and what it could mean for our lives.
Yeah.
You know, the big picture implications.
Absolutely. So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's just lay the groundwork. What exactly are we talking about when we say BCI?
Well, at its simplest, a BCI is a direct connection between your brain and an external device.
A direct connection.
Yeah. Think of it like this. It's unlocking the power of your thoughts so you can interact with the digital world and maybe even more amazing, have that digital world interact back with your brain.
That's wild. So our listener, they gave us a really great mix of information articles, research studies, even some patents I think I saw in there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So our mission today is to go through all of that, find those really crucial insights, and kind of synthesize it all for you, make sense of this complex topic.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Where did this whole idea of controlling things with your mind even come from?
Well, the story really starts way back in 1924 with a pretty fundamental discovery, the electroencephalogram, or EEG as we usually call it.
The EEG, right?
This was discovered by Hans Berger, and it was the very first time we could record the electrical activity of the human brain without having to do anything invasive.
So non-invasive, that's a big deal.
It was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it might seem pretty basic now, but that ability to actually listen in on the brain's electrical signals, it was revolutionary. It was like we finally had a way to hear those whispers of the brain, a glimpse into its language.
So you're saying that the EEG was like the first microphone for the brain?
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like finally we had a tool to eavesdrop on the brain's electrical conversations. And with the EEG, researchers could start to figure out which electrical patterns went with different mental states, what the brain was doing when someone was thinking or feeling certain things.
That makes sense. So then what happened next?
Well, fast forward to the 1960s, and this is where things start to get really interesting. We see the first experiments where animals were able to control external devices using their brain signals.
Whoa. Hold on, animals controlling things with their minds.
I know, right? It was groundbreaking stuff. Of course, these were very simple tasks at first, like moving a cursor on a screen or something. But it was proof that this kind of direct interaction was possible, that we could translate those brain signals into commands.
That must have been a huge moment for the researchers involved.
Oh, absolutely. It was a real breakthrough moment. And then a little while later, 1973, we have another pivotal moment. Jacques Vidal, he actually coined the term brain-computer interface, the term we still use today.
Oh, wow. So that's where the name BCI comes from.
Exactly. And his research using EEGs was really important for establishing those early principles of how we could make brains and computers talk to each other.
Yeah.
He was definitely a visionary in the field.
So it started with recording brain activity with the EEG, and then it moved to using those signals to control things. That's a pretty big jump.
It was a major step. And another big one came in the 1980s when we saw the development of invasive BCIs.
Invasive BCIs. So instead of just reading brain signals from outside the skull, now they're going inside.
Exactly. Now, researchers started implanting electrodes directly into the brain tissue of animals.
That sounds a lot more complex.
It was way more complex. It allowed for much more direct and precise recording of those neural signals. It's like the difference between listening to a concert from outside the stadium and being right there in the front row with the band.
Yeah, I get it. A much clearer signal.
Much clearer. But of course, it also introduced a whole new set of challenges. It meant surgery, and there are always risks with that. And then there's the issue of biocompatibility, making sure these devices can exist in the brain long term without causing problems.
So it was a trade-off, more risk, but potentially much better results.
Exactly. And then in the 1990s, we saw the first human trials of BCIs.
Yeah.
It was a huge moment, and the focus at that time was mainly on helping people with severe motor impairments, giving them more control and independence.
So like helping people who couldn't move their limbs.
Yeah, and this is where a really important device came into play, the Utah Array.
The Utah Array, I remember seeing that in some of the materials.
It's a tiny little grid of electrodes, and it's still a cornerstone of BCI research today. It allows us to record the activity of a lot of individual neurons all at the same time, which gives us a really rich picture of what's happening in the brain.
That's amazing. So then what about the 2000s? Where did things go from there?
The 2000s saw a real surge in the development of medical applications for BCIs, and one of the most notable achievements was the creation of the first speech neuroprosthesis.
A speech neuroprosthesis, what is that?
It's a device that allows people who have lost the ability to speak to communicate using their brain signals. It basically translates their thoughts into synthesized speech.
Wow, so giving a voice back to people who can't speak.
Exactly. It's a truly remarkable application of BCI technology.
Okay, so that brings us pretty much up to the present.
Yeah.
So what's the state of BCIs today? How are we actually connecting our brains to devices now?
Well, these days we can group the main types of BCIs into three categories. We've already talked about invasive BCIs, which involve those implanted electrodes like the Utah Array and Synchron Stentrode. They give us the best signal quality and the most precise control, but of course they come with those surgical risks and the long-term challenges of having something implanted in the brain.
Right, so high reward, but also higher risk.
Exactly. Then on the other end of the spectrum, we have non-invasive BCIs. These are the ones that don't require any surgery.
Like those EEG headsets you see.
Exactly. EEG headsets are the most common example. They're much safer and more accessible because you don't need surgery. But the trade-off is that the signals we get are a lot weaker and messier. It's kind of like trying to listen to someone whisper in a noisy room.
I can see how that would be difficult to get a clear reading.
Yeah. And then there's a third category called hybrid BCIs. These try to combine the best of both worlds by using different technologies together.
So like a mix of invasive and non-invasive.
Not necessarily. It could be two different non-invasive technologies. For example, you could use EEG along with something called functional near-infrared spectroscopy, or FNRS.
FNRS? That's a mouthful.
I know, right? But it basically measures blood flow changes in the brain, which gives us a different but useful piece of information about brain activity. The idea is that by combining different technologies, you can get a richer, more complete picture of what's going on.
So it's like getting multiple perspectives on the brain's activity.
Exactly. So those are the main types of BCIs we have today. But who's actually developing them? Who are the big players in this field right now?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. I mean, I saw a bunch of company names in the research, but who are the ones really pushing the boundaries?
Well, one of the most high-profile companies has to be Neuralink, founded by, Elon Musk.
Neuralink, yeah, they get a lot of attention.
They do. And they're focused on developing implantable BCIs that have a crazy high density of electrodes, like thousands of them on a tiny chip. Their goals are pretty ambitious. They're talking about everything from helping people with paralysis regain movement to potentially treating things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
So they're really going for those big medical breakthroughs.
They are. And then there's Synchron, which is taking a slightly different approach. They developed a device called the Stentrode, which is pretty amazing because it's implanted through the blood vessels.
Wait, through the blood vessels? No open brain surgery?
Nope. They're able to get it into the brain without having to open up the skull, which is obviously a lot less invasive. Their main focus right now is on helping people with ALS communicate.
So a less risky way to implant a BCI? That's incredible.
It is, and it could really open up access to these technologies for more people.
Yeah.
And then there's BlackRock Neurotech. They've been in the BCI game for a long time, and their Utah Array is used by research labs and clinical trials all over the world.
Oh, so they're kind of providing the tools for other researchers?
Yes, exactly. They're really considered leaders in invasive BCI technology, and their work is helping to drive a lot of the progress we're seeing.
Okay, what about on the non-invasive side? Are there any companies doing really interesting stuff there?
Yeah, definitely. There's Kernel, for example. They're working on advanced EEG technology, and they're really focused on things like cognitive enhancement and monitoring mental states. So imagine being able to track your focus or your stress levels in real time.
That could be useful for a lot of things.
It could. And then there's NextMind, which was recently acquired by Snap Inc. They developed a non-invasive BCI that can actually translate signals from the visual cortex into commands.
The visual cortex, so like what you're seeing.
Exactly. And this has a lot of potential for augmented reality applications. Imagine being able to control what you see in AR just by focusing your attention.
That's pretty wild.
It is. And last but not least, we have BitBrain. They make wearable EEG devices that are designed to be more portable and affordable. which is really important for making this technology more accessible. They're used for things like medical diagnostics and neuroscience research.
So it sounds like there's a lot of different companies working on a lot of different aspects of BCIs.
There is. It's a really diverse and dynamic field. Okay, so we've talked about the types of BCIs and some of the companies developing them, but what are these devices actually capable of doing right now? What kind of real-world applications are we seeing?
Yeah, let's get down to the practical stuff. How are BCIs actually being used today?
One of the biggest areas where BCIs are making a real difference is in medical rehabilitation. We're seeing them used to restore communication for people who have lost the ability to speak through those speech neuroprostheses we talked about.
Right, so those are already helping people.
They are. And BCIs are also being used to help people control prosthetic limbs, giving them more independence and mobility.
So someone with a prosthetic arm could actually control it with their thoughts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even restore some sensory capabilities, like with cochlear implants.
Cochlear implants. Yeah, I know those have been around for a while.
They have, and they're actually a great example of a BCI that's been widely adopted and successful. They directly stimulate the auditory nerve to restore hearing.
So even though they've been around for a while, they're still considered a BCI.
There are. They're a classic example of how BCIs can interface with the nervous system to restore function. And we're also seeing BCIs increasingly used as assistive technologies. Particularly the non-invasive ones are helping people with disabilities to control wheelchairs, computers, and even smart home devices using their thoughts.
That's really empowering, giving people more control over their environment.
It is, and it can significantly improve their quality of life.
So beyond those medical and assistive uses, are there any other applications?
Yeah, there are some really interesting things happening in the area of cognitive monitoring, using BCIs to track things like attention, stress, and cognitive load.
So like seeing how focused someone is or how stressed they are. Exactly. This is being used in gaming education and even in the workplace to understand how people are engaging with tasks and to optimize performance. And of course, BCIs are also incredibly valuable tools for neuroscience research, helping us to learn more about how the brain works.
So even though this technology is still relatively new, it's already having a pretty big impact.
It is, but there are still challenges, right?
Yeah, there have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, this is cutting-edge stuff. What are some of the biggest hurdles that researchers and developers are facing?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is signal quality. With non-invasive BCIs, those signals we get from outside the skull, they can be really weak and noisy, which makes it hard to accurately decode what the person's intending to do.
Like trying to hear a conversation over a lot of static.
Exactly. And while invasive BCIs give us much clearer signals, they have their own problems, like making sure those implanted electrodes stay stable and functional over long periods of time. The body is a pretty harsh environment for electronics.
Yeah, I can imagine it's not easy to keep those things working perfectly inside the brain. It's not. Another big challenge is calibration and training. To use a BCI effectively, the person usually has to go through a lot of training to learn how to control their brain activity in a way that the device can understand. And each device has to be calibrated to that specific person's brain, which takes time and can be a bit frustrating.
So it's not like you just put on a headset and you're instantly controlling things with your mind.
Not quite yet.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the issue of cost and accessibility. Invasive BCIs in particular are very expensive, both the technology itself and the surgical procedures. So right now, these technologies are only available to a limited number of people.
Right, so it's not something most people can just go out and buy.
Not yet, at least.
Yeah.
Things are changing quickly.
Yeah.
So what about the future? What kind of advancements are on the horizon for BCIs?
Yeah, that's what I'm really excited about. Where's all this heading?
Well, one of the biggest trends we're seeing is miniaturization and the development of wireless technology.
So smaller devices and no more wires.
Exactly. Imagine tiny, implantable devices that can communicate wirelessly with external systems. That's where things are going. And artificial intelligence is going to play a huge role too.
AI.
How so?
AI is getting really good at decoding those complex brain signals and translating them into commands. So as AI gets better, BCIs are going to become more accurate, more powerful. We'll be able to do more with our thoughts.
So it's like AI is learning to speak the brain's language.
Exactly. And we're also seeing a lot of research into bidirectional BCIs.
Bidirectional. So instead of just reading from the brain, they can also send signals back.
Exactly. This could be huge for things like restoring sensory feedback to prosthetic limbs.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to not only control a prosthetic hand, but also feel what it's touching.
That would be revolutionary.
It would. And there's a whole field of neural hybrid systems, which are basically trying to create interfaces that can merge more seamlessly with the brain's natural circuitry, mimicking the way our own neurons communicate.
Wow, that's getting into some really advanced territory.
It is. but the possibilities are incredible. So with all these advancements, what kind of future applications can we imagine for BCIs?
Yeah, I'm ready for some more mind-blowing possibilities.
So in medicine, we could see breakthroughs in treating things like stroke, epilepsy, even mental health disorders by being able to precisely modulate brain activity in real time.
So kind of like a highly targeted, personalized therapy for the brain.
Exactly. And beyond treating illness, there's the potential for human augmentation using BCIs to enhance memory learning and even sensory perception.
So like making us smarter, faster, stronger.
Well, not necessarily stronger, but you get the idea. It raises a lot of interesting ethical questions about what it means to be human and where we draw the line between therapy and enhancement.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion.
It is, but it's something we need to be thinking about. And then there's the possibility of direct brain-to-brain communication, literally sharing thoughts and information directly from one mind to another.
That sounds like something out of a telepathy movie.
It does, but it could become reality. And of course, we can't forget about the potential for neurogaming and entertainment. Imagine truly immersive virtual reality experiences controlled entirely by your thoughts.
Okay, that's the one I'm signing up for.
Me too. It's going to be an exciting future for sure. But with all this potential comes a lot of responsibility, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What about the market side of things? Where is the BCI market headed?
Well, it's definitely a growing market. On the non-invasive side, we're already seeing those headsets being used for gaming, meditation, and other consumer applications. And on the invasive side, the focus is likely to stay on medical applications for now, just because of the complexity and the risks.
Right, so those are probably going to be the big money makers for a while.
Probably. But overall, the BCI market is expected to grow significantly. Some estimates say it could be worth billions of dollars by the mid-2030s.
Wow, that's huge. So it sounds like BCIs are not only going to change our lives, but also create a lot of economic opportunities.
They are. It's a field with a lot of potential, both for improving lives and for driving innovation.
So to kind of sum up everything we've talked about today, we started with those early discoveries, like the EEG that laid the foundation for BCIs.
Yeah, those were the building blocks.
And then we looked at the different types of BCIs that exist today: invasive, non-invasive, and hybrid.
And all the amazing companies that are developing them.
Exactly, and all the incredible things they can already do, from helping people with disabilities to pushing the boundaries of human capability.
And we can't forget about all those exciting future possibilities, those things that sound like science fiction, but might be just around the corner.
It's mind-blowing stuff, and it's clear that BCIs are going to have a huge impact on our world as they become more sophisticated and more widespread.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's going to be fascinating to see how this all unfolds and what kind of future we create with these technologies.
And as we navigate that future, it's crucial to remember that with all this power comes a lot of responsibility. We need to be thinking about the ethical implications and making sure that these technologies are used for good.
I completely agree. We need to be mindful of the potential risks as well as the benefits and make sure that everyone has a voice in shaping this future.
That's a great point. This is a conversation that needs to involve everyone, not just scientists and engineers, but also ethicists, policymakers, and the public.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to be working together to ensure that these technologies are developed and used in a way that benefits all of humanity.
Well said. So that wraps up our deep dive into the world of brain-computer interfaces.
What a journey.
If you found this as fascinating as we did and you want to explore more complex topics with us, make sure to subscribe to Dansplain.
And don't forget to visit our website, www.dansplain.xyz.
That's right, at www.dansplain.xyz. You'll find all the latest episodes, articles, partner products, and a whole lot more.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible adventure into the world of BCIs.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
Bye.